Disclaimer, disclaimer. I told you we'd be back. That's right, you guys. I'm back with Chapter 2 of The Curious Adventures of Jimmy McGee. Welcome back to you guys. So, Chapter 2, Jimmy McGee in his summer headquarters. Hold on, let me scooch in for a sec. Okay. There we go. Now, hold on. That night, Jimmy McGee had not gone right off to sleep, as Amy and Clarissa had. It was all on account of that book, the Who's Who book by Amy. Until evening, the day had gone as usual for him. When he had finished his usual rounds, turning on faucets, fixing broken things, banging pipes all the way up and down the beach, and way, way away, he had to go back to his headquarters for a special tool for a special job. It was then that on that little wooden bench at the top of the dune, he spotted the little red-brown notebook, flipped open to a page where he saw his name. Puzzled, he picked it up, read the name of it, and what it said about him. While mulling over why he was mentioned in such a curious way, Hero, he thought he should pick the book up and put it in his tool bag. Otherwise, it might blow away in the night, and Amy would never see it again, and neither would he. In the morning early, he would put it back, and Amy would never know it had been on an adventure, since it would be all nice and sunny and dry. So he did the special hard job he had to do down Pawtucket Way and came back to his headquarters. He really was very curious to see what else besides himself was in this book. He stretched out on a little hammock, and he had slung up in his headquarters between two sturdy roots. Jimmy McGee's summer headquarters were very near that platform at the top of the 26 steps where he found this odd book. They were in a little cave under the hard grassy ledge that ran along the top of the dune all up and down the beach. Sitting up there on the wooden platform, neither Amy nor anybody else would know there was this snug little cave nearby, nor that Jimmy McGee, the little banger on pipes, had his summer headquarters in it, and no one could see in. Here's a little illustration of Mr. McGee in his headquarters. Straggling roots of tough seagrass made a tattered lacy curtain that concealed the entranceway. Anyway, no one would think to look here. His summer headquarters were small, but they were big enough for him and his things, because he and his things were little too. If any creature at all should wander in, he or she might acquire a touch of magic, because Jimmy McGee himself was magic. But he had few visitors. Now and then a wandering cricket or curious beetle, but they would soon wander back and not knowing they had been touched by magic. Jimmy McGee made himself comfortable in his hammock, and he chewed on a piece of beach plum root and prepared to read this book of Amy's. He wanted to see what a book like this had him in it said. A leisurely rest of this sort was unusual for Jimmy McGee. Generally, he allowed himself 1 or 2 seconds from his rounds for a nap of 1 or 2 seconds. This showed what a strong hold this book had on him. He opened it up with curious anticipation. Right away, he saw that book was written in alphabetical order. He knew the alphabet. He knew how to read, and in many languages. He tended the nuts and bolts in his pipes of the library at Washington, D.C., near his winter headquarters, which were in Mount Rose Park. If he read something that he liked, he would make a copy of it in his own bebop code and store it in his little pipe library. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering. I just mentioned that I have a stutter when I'm reading in the last video. Okay. To be really comfortable, he now took off his stovepipe hat and hung it on a handy grassy root to the left of his hammock. He had made this hat out of a small piece of black stovepipe that he'd found in the alleyway behind Amy's house in Washington, D.C. It must once have been part of a parlor stove because it was so small, not big like a kitchen stovepipe would be. He had made a top for it out of tin stove flue covering, which he had to cut down quite a little to make it fit. Although the middle of this flue covering had a pretty picture of a waterfall, he had blackened it out because he wanted his whole hat to be black. He had bent up the bottom of the stovepipe hat neatly and rounded it so he could tip his hat if he wanted to. He kept the hat shined with stove polish, and from a nearly empty can he'd also found. His hat was really quite elegant, a sort of an evening hat. Silky and shiny, but he wore it almost all the time. It was a handy and safe place to keep important things in. Jimmy McGee had made everything that he wore. His coat had been made out of a piece of bombazine a tailor just threw out in the trash can. He had a cape, too, made of the same stuff, which he wore when he had to work to do in the cellar of the opera house, or way up in his round glass dome. There had been enough left for him to make himself a regular work suit and this little hammock, in which he was now resting. He'd also made a bombazine bag, which he slung over his shoulder to put found things when they wouldn't go in his hat. It had a drawstring so you could pull it tightly together. This drawstring was made from leather and probably was a shoestring once used by some mountain climber in his sturdy footgear. And he had a little leather belt with brass studs which he hung his tools on when they didn't fit in the bag. The leather belt was probably from a little girl's roller skates. Maybe Amy's? That's actually in the book. It was like a miniature walking hardware store. He also had a piece of bombazette, a more delicate fabric than bombazine, that he'd garnered from the same tailor shop. This finery he had stored in a piece of pipe, all its own for some unknown future need. But now, resting in his bombazine hammock, he had felt the time had come for him to study this little book that he had saved for Amy, so it would not be soaked by fog or dew. It was a strange book. Though it always opened itself to the end page, the book was in a splendid ABC order, the way Jimmy liked things to be. He himself kept his nuts and bolts in their proper bins, arranged neatly and according to the size and shape. So this book of Amy's was the way he liked to have things. But why did it always pop open to the end page? This was a baffler. And yes, he saw his name again. McGee, Jimmy, a little fellow, a plumber, a banger on pipes, a hero. That's why he was lying down in his hammock and why he couldn't go drowsily off to sleep the way Amy and Clarissa had. All that Amy said about him in her book was true, except for the hero part of it. Where did Amy even get an idea like that about him? He closed the book, but it wouldn't stay closed. Opened itself up all the time to the end page as if though that page, it was page 13, said, "Read me, hero!" This was more than a little unsettling to Jimmy McGee. To take his mind off this hero business, he sprang up, slung his bombazine bag over his shoulder, and went off to his regular nighttime affairs. Soon the Cape Codder would be puffing by with the cod and the lobsters, the catch of the day, on its way to Boston. He had to shoot the cats and dogs out of the way. He had to shoot the cats and dogs and even now and then a cow out of the way. So off he went, for all his work was part of the real business along with pipes and plumbing. Crap. Leave hero work to heroes. Leave him out of it. Then he returned to headquarters. He parted his fluttery curtains. The Amy book was still there, right in his hammock where he had left it, flipped open right to the end page. Might as well call it the Jimmy McGee page. He scrutinized this page to see what company he was with. The name above his was Lydia Little, a teeny tiny doll with bright blue eyes, a do-nothing doll. Can't walk, can't talk, can't say mama, has bristly, curly, long golden hair, named after Lydia Big. In the book, Lydia Big was above Lydia Little. Lydia Big can do all the things Lydia Little can't do. Too big to bring to Truro. It was Bear or her. Bear won. There were no N's on this page, but there was an empty space under McGee Jimmy. Maybe Amy left it empty on purpose for the occasion when he really might become a hero and say how that came about. All these things were very confusing to Jimmy McGee, who was used to everything going along in an orderly way. Not the way things were now, suddenly finding himself with the word hero attached to his name in a Who's Who book. And why that blank space beneath him? Why? That night he did his work in zoomy time, which means 3 times faster than usual. It wasn't easy work either. There was trouble in the electric bolt box in the cellar of a motion picture house. The lights kept coming on and off. Lights kept coming on and going off right in the middle of the best part of the show. In spite of much stomping from the outraged people above him, he fixed everything and then returned to headquarters. He took off his bombazine coat, folded it neatly, and put it at the foot of his hammock. He put Amy's book inside his stovepipe hat, which was the safest place for it, and kept his hat on his head. Sometimes he hung his hat on a hat rack, a tough root near his hammock where he could grab it in a hurry. Not tonight, though. His hat with this book in it was going to stay on top of his head until bright morning sunshine, where he'd put the Who's Who book back on the bench. He sat down his entranceway and repeated the words in that Amy book. McGee, Jimmy, little fellow. All of it ending with hero. He said the words over and over again so often that they made him laugh. They were like lines in a play. He surprised himself laughing like that. That Who's Who girl has gotten the wrong idea of me. That's the trouble. I'll think of something else, maybe some of the other people in the book. You can't think of yourself all the time. That's vain. I'll study the book, learn it by heart. A lovely breeze rustled the grass above and behind him. The moon was high, and its path sent silver ripples across the sea on the waves rolling in way down below. Try as he did, though, the word hero could not get itself out of his head. Just thinking about it, how you could be a hero was hard enough, let alone being a labeled one. He liked hard work, was used to it, but he was not used to the idea of being a hero. He wondered if he had to be one just because Amy said it so in her book. Still, he wished he could keep this book he was in. Sitting in his doorway, Jimmy McGee began to study the clouds, the moon, the stars, the planets, and watch them slowly move across the heavens. He learned a lot this way. He knew that toward the end of the summer, there would be a hurricane, and the name of it would be Lobelia. He knew these things long before regular weather forecasters did. At hurricane time, he always had plenty to do. Lobelia. He liked the sound of it, a really pretty name for a hurricane, and might bring some curious surprise along with it, besides wind and rain and tidal waves. And the name would fit right on the same page of Amy's book as his own hero named it. There was an empty space, empty as if it were saying, write down a name here. Okay, that would do. He took the book out of his hat, and by the light of the pale early dawn in his tiny scrawl, he wrote Lobelia. His writing looked like marks left by a little bird. This amused him. It would give Amy something to puzzle about. Just even things up, like her having given him all this hero business to puzzle about. Today was going to be a beautiful day. The first day of vacation for Amy and her family in the Busy Bee. Soon the sun would rise. He must put Amy's book back where he had found it, where the bench was good and dry. She would never know that book had spent the night in his stovepipe hat of a character in her book by the name of McGee Jimmy, hero. He was reluctant to part with Amy's book, so he went inside his headquarters, and by the light of the early dawn seeping through his grass curtains, he made a copy of Amy's book to keep for himself. He had a nook where he kept scraps of paper he gathered from a newspaper printing shop down Provincetown Way. So now he had his own copy of Amy's Who's Who book. He had several books written in this tiny script, a kind of code. He kept each book rolled up tightly in his own piece of pipe. They were his scrolls, a pipe library where he arranged neatly in a back corner of his cave. This was his summer library. He had another scroll pipe library back in his Washington, D.C. winter headquarters. A learned little plumber, this tiny Jimmy McGee was. But hero? Sitting there quietly, not going on his rounds, he mulled over this hero business and mulled over it. Took his mind off his real work. But he had to figure it out, what Amy meant. He figured there were 3 kinds of heroes, the long ago kind, the present day kind, and the future kind, the hero to be kind. He mused. He pondered. Maybe, just maybe, mind you, maybe in some long ago past time, long, long ago, I once was a hero, and I have forgotten about it. If I ever knew it, then when it was happening, oh hey, maybe there is. Maybe I'm saying another Jimmy McGee that I never heard of, but Amy has. Some hero of long ago. And maybe I was named after him. A sort of fellow who always gets himself put into books by other people. Say a book with a name like Stories of Famous People. Or the little boy who held his finger in a hole in the dike so the town would not get flooded if the dam burst. He probably didn't know he was being a hero and soon would be in books practically all over the world. Or a hero of most recent times. To have streets and boulevards named after him. And a statue of him on a horse in Central Park. Or some park somewhere. Or maybe in a museum, in a little garden, outside the museum where the fountain's splashing water all over him all the time. Or maybe a hero, like himself for instance, behind his waterfall in Melrose Park. Sorry, I did the accent. I was not aware that there weren't quotations there. Okay, anyway. Or maybe a hero so recent he has ticker tape parades down Fifth Avenue or Constitution Avenue, and people clapping, shouting, roaring, "Hail, hail!" Or maybe Amy meant that he, Jimmy McGee, would be a hero in the near future. He had better keep his eyes out for that chance, happening to bring Amy's book up to date. But not to let all this hero business interfere with his real work. No, never. The sun was not yet high enough for him to risk putting away Amy's valuable book back where she had left it. The bench was still damp. Perhaps some seagull, they are curious birds, think everything they see is possibly good to eat, something novel, and squawk and scream over it. Might fly off with it in its sharp beak to Gull Island or even Provincetown. Scattering shredded pages of Amy's Who's Who book, including the important L&M page, all over the ocean. He couldn't risk that. Amy wouldn't be out of bed anyway. He had taken good care of her book and wanted to see her delight after finding it safe and sound. All he had done that was extra was to have added a little something in it for fun. So he popped open his bombazine bag. So he popped it in his bombazine bag, and then he zoomed off to make his morning rounds, waking people up, the ones who had to get to work early. Check the milk train. Was it on time? Slow? Check the switches. The Boston Globe. Was it on the train? Well, all the usual morning chores. He went faster than ever, making the telephone wires hum, gathering extra electric speed, because he wanted to return Amy's book, which was bumping about in his bombazine bag with a very special little box about 2 inches long and 1 inch high and wide, an oblong, very strong little box. This he always carried with him. It was what he was going to put the 2 special bolts in someday. He called it the Magic Bolt Box. He had a good collection of bolts, all right, but something was lacking. Then one day, an idea, like a bolt out of the blue, struck him. For a long time, he had a longing to have a thunderbolt and lightning bolt represented in his collection. Perhaps he could capture in his box the very tiny, small tip end of a lightning bolt and the last rumble of a thunderbolt. To try and capture these rare items for his bolt collection would help him forget the hero business. As far as his chores went, all was fine. All trains on time, no dogs hurt, no cats either, no little slowpoke hedgehog run over, pipes everywhere, all okay. All were banged on louder than ever, shuddering the cottages and shaking the people out of their beds. The sun was up. He zoomed back to his summer headquarters in 660 time. He went so fast that he might have passed himself coming back. This was how curious he was about Amy's book. Sorry about that. It was hard for him to part with it, but he was not a book thief or any other kind of thief. He placed the book on the bench in the sweet morning sunshine. It flipped automatically to the end page. Then the breeze fluttered the pages, and back they always came to the end page. This was a baffler. Jimmy McGee got back to his headquarters just in the nick of time. Amy and Clarissa, still dressed in their nightgowns, barefooted, he hadn't even banged their pipes yet, tore over to the bench at the top of the 26 steps. Shows how valuable that book is. thought Jimmy McGee. Something magic about it, maybe. He postponed finishing his usual business and stayed behind the lacy grass curtains of his headquarters and listened. "Ah-ha," breathed Amy. "It's safe and sound. Always open as always to the M page. And you know who's on that page, don't you?" "Why, Jimmy McGee, of course," said Clarissa. "But Amy, what are all those funny-looking smudges below McGee Jimmy and that empty space there?" Amy looked closely. "Oh, those are probably the footprints of some curious gull or an adventuresome sandpiper who made it up the 26 steps. I'm not surprised. At the beach, anything can happen." Amy smelled her book. "Smells like stove polish," she said, laughing. "Book, have you been on adventures in the night, like the midnight ride of Paul Revere?" Clarissa laughed. Amy went on. "It's lucky I had written in the front, if this book had a chance to roam, bring it back to Amy's house. Reward, no questions asked." "That person saw that and brought it back and didn't wait for the reward," said Clarissa. "We'll bring a pancake out for him. This will be his reward for honesty. But come on in, since it is pancakes for breakfast. I smelled them." "Smell better than stove polish," said Clarissa. Amy hugged her little book. "I love you, book," she said. "And I'm glad you're safe and sound, and I like the smell of stove polish." Amy and Clarissa went in. Jimmy McGee heard all that talk, and he heard the last words before the screen door slammed behind him. Amy said, "After pancakes, we'll put on our bathing suits, go down to the beach, and we'll make sandcastles." Clarissa clapped her hands and jumped up and down. "Oh," she cried, "I've never done that before in all my born life." "Well, take little Lydia," said Amy. "She's never seen the ocean either. We'll make a castle for her, just for her." "And," said Clarissa sternly, "Amy, you must leave your Who's Who book in the Busy Bee." "Yes," said Amy. "I will tuck it under the mattress. Ian Wags won't know where I hid it." "Yes," agreed Clarissa, "because maybe it is magic, opening up all the time to the same page." And they went into the Busy Bee. Jimmy McGee heard the screen door squeaked and thought he should fix it when no one was around. He could smell the bacon and the pancakes, but none of these things interested him now. What interested him now was this Lydia Little business. He got his scroll copy of the Who's Who book out of its pipe and read, "Lydia Little, a teeny tiny doll with bright blue eyes, a do-nothing doll. Well," thought Jimmy McGee, "soon I will see this little Lydia doll." So he postponed his next rounds until after he got a glimpse of her. What he wondered was this. Was there a connection between him and little Lydia? No, he answered himself, a happenstance. Just the correct place in the alphabet for the two of us. He was number 13 in the alphabet. She was number 12. Still, he mulled over this coincidence. Was it tied up in any way with McGee Jimmy? A hero? Is that what Amy knew about and he didn't? He should go out now on his rounds, do his work. But then Amy and Clarissa, with towels and pails and shovels, came out of the Busy Bee. Amy had some little thing clutched tightly in her fist. Might it be little Lydia, the teeny tiny doll, the do-nothing doll? He had to wait and see. It might be little Lydia. If it is, I must wait and get a real good look at her. Jimmy McGee thought. After all, in the book we're on the same page. In real life our paths may cross. I must wait and see and be ready. He tapped his stovepipe hat and sat down in his doorway and watched. That's it for now. See you guys in the next chapter, chapter 3. Take care.